Margin-based campaigns in Google is a broken strategy, and I'm here to tell you why they don't work and what you should do instead. Margin-based campaigns are still not only being run in Google ad accounts, but are still being recommended by people, which just constantly surprises me because the foundation for that type of campaign structure is just full of holes. Margin-based campaigns is this thing where you set up different Google shopping campaigns or different PMAX campaigns for different groups of products based on their margin. It'll typically look something like this. You have a high margin campaign targeting 300% ROAS, you have a mid-margin campaign targeting 500% ROAS, and you have a low-margin campaign targeting at 700% ROAS. Whatever these targets are, it doesn't really matter, but basically what we're trying to do here is you're trying to bid high for a high margin product and thereby get a lot of volume, maximize revenue, and for the lower margin products, you're basically trying to protect them so they're not unprofitable. Having all these products in the same campaign is on paper really bad, and it makes a lot of sense to break them up because obviously you want to get you want to protect your lower margin products from not overspending. Plus you want to get as much out of your high margin products. The problem is that it assumes the consumers buy what they click on, which isn't the case. I've done this analysis in many accounts, and every single time I review it, at least 50% of consumers buy a completely different brand or completely different category than the product that they clicked on. The second problem is that the way that Google reports on this. Many assume that because Google show clicks and conversions tied back to the individual product or item ID, then it's showing what people actually bought. This is also wrong. Google reports on what products were clicked on, not the product that was actually bought. Although you can expand your conversion tracking with cart data and get all this information, it still doesn't change my point of view on margin-based campaigns. The third problem is that you're splitting up your data. If you have 1,000 conversions a month, then it's not a super big deal. But anything below 1,000 conversions per month, and smart bidding starts underperforming. Maybe it's not an issue for some of your campaigns, but across all three margin-based campaigns, it can be a problem. Let's take this example this as an example. You have 1,000 conversions in total. You have 500 in your mid-margin campaigns, you have 350 in your high margin campaign, but you only have 150 in your low margin campaign, which also has a pretty high ROAS target. Suddenly smart bidding is having an awful lot of trouble optimizing your low margin campaign with a high ROAS target and only 5 conversions a day. This results in a lower overall performance because, again, you're splitting up all your data. Some of your campaigns will have very little data to work based on, and that can hurt the performance. So even though you are going from 1,000 conversions and splitting those up, you might end up having those 150 conversions in your low margin campaign actually end up being 120 or 110 or net not hitting the ROAS target you actually intended it to be, just because the system has less data to work with. So what works best instead? There's two ways to go about this. One is consolidate campaigns into high and low margin to retain as much data as possible. You just need to acknowledge that you can't 100% know what people buy, but it's better than nothing. If you truly have two different categories, like speakers and a couch you have 10% margin and the speaker you have 50% margin, you can kind of know that people are not going to jump from one category to the other there. But if it is that you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different brands within one category and they all have very different margins, then it's a very flawed strategy to use a margin-based campaign. So the proper way to fix this is to implement a gross profit tracking method, or you can also say you're tracking contribution margin. It depends. Like I say gross profit, while others call it profit. Some call it POAS, like profit on ad spend. Some call it contribution margin. It's kind of all the same thing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to track the gross profit from a sale instead of revenue, which means that you bypass the need to run margin-based campaigns. Each transaction tells Google exactly what margin or contribution margin or gross profit that's derived from that transaction. So it knows that product A has a low margin and product B has a high margin, which it can use to set the bids accordingly because it gets the data right from the get-go. If we take this example, then gross profit is calculated like this. So what we're right now sending to Google is just revenue. On the other hand, If we send in profit or gross profit or contribution margin, then we're sending in revenue minus discounts, minus cost of goods sold, minus shipping costs, minus payment costs, minus packaging and handling. And this is such a monumentally better way to implement a nuanced bidding method when you have different margins for different products. Profit-based bidding like this allows you to do several things. One, it track what ROAS level drives the highest profit in volume instead of an arbitrary number like ROAS. It allows smart bidding to bid higher for high margin products and keywords, segments, devices, and all that. And it gives you insight to exactly when you lose money on a sale. We in Savvy use this to know how low we can actually go for an upper funnel keyword before we start actually losing money. It helps drive a ton of growth when implemented the right way. So to compare this, the right way, the things that I say is the right way at least, is profit-based bidding tracks what actually happens in a transaction. It also tracks how many products are in there. It tracks if you have a high margin, low margin product in the same cart, etc., etc. And the wrong way today, as I believe it, is the margin-based campaigns track what people click on, but it doesn't show what people actually end up buying. So you don't get the effect you're actually trying to get. So the problems that I have with profit tracking or contribution margin tracking is that when you run a sale like 10% off, 20% off, 30% off, the changes in data can hurt a lot in terms of how smart bidding works. Because all of a sudden it's used to saying, let's say you get $100 in value, all of a sudden it gets 80 or 70. So in essence, the ROAS that it works based off just drops from one day to another and doesn't know why. That's a problem because during a sale, we actually wanted to drive more volume. So that can really be a challenge. Now, there's ways to get around this. Conversion rates goes up during a sale. So all of a sudden it performs better. But for some businesses that run a lot of sales, this is a really big issue because smart bidding doesn't have this stable data anymore. The second thing is that very low margin businesses might have so little data that it becomes really hard to work with smart bidding. So if you consistently run at 120% profit on ad spend or POAS or ROAS target, changing from 120 to 115 or 110, it's basically cutting your profit in half. But Google Ads have it's such a small change for Google Ads, going from 120% to 110%. So it can really be tough to work with smart bidding at that level. It can also, for some people, I found it now that they can see the profit from every sale, then they start being way too focused on profitability. And like every single day or week where they're not hitting a certain profit level in a Google Ads account, then they just go crazy. They decrease bids to try to be more profitable, and their volume goes down, and it just hurts everything. Here, it's you need to also use something like a blended ROAS, new customers, or any other data point. Also, I would like to say if you have the same margin on all products, it's unnecessary. If you have the same margin on like 90% of your revenue, it still doesn't matter to do any of these things. It's just unnecessary to do. Last thing I wanted to mention is Google has a profit-based bidding in beta at the moment, and it should come out during the early months of 2025. But it opens 3 issues. You can't troubleshoot it like you can yourself or with a software like ProfitMetrics. If I put on my tinfoil hat, then you also give Google your COGS and exact margins. This is a tinfoil hat theory, but I'm very worried about what that can do to the auction if Google knows exactly how hard to squeeze you. And it doesn't account for things like shipping and handling. They're minor things in the bigger picture, but for some businesses, it's important to calculate that as part of their profitability. So to summarize, before we go to actions from here, what consumers click on does not equal what they end up buying or adding to the cart alongside the product. Splitting your data into multiple campaigns is not ideal for smart bidding. Only a lot of data can allow this to work, so that's why margin-based campaigns can actually hurt your performance better than improving it. Profit-based bidding with a software like something like ProfitMetrics gives smart bidding much better data to bid directly on profit, which can open up for much better performance. Profit-based bidding is not just applicable to shopping, but works well with shopping as well, which everybody seems to ignore in this thing. So if we put up a margin-based campaign for shopping, why don't we do the same thing for search? Why don't we set different targets for them? Most people just ignore that. And you avoid all of this margin-based campaign structure, which opens the door to create a more sophisticated campaign structure in shopping or PMax, because if you're already splitting your shopping campaigns in margins, then splitting them again, and you're really splitting your data too much. So you can't that. You usually just have one shot to split your shopping campaigns. So by using that one shot you have for margins, is just not the best way to get better performance. So based on this, if you have a lot of different brands, a lot of different categories with different margins, I highly recommend to look at ProfitMetrics or custom code profit tracking yourself. It is doable. ProfitMetrics skips all that. Second thing, implement it into your account. I have another video on how to actually implement profit-based bidding. And the third, try to play around with the targets. Just make sure you use something like blended ROAS, or you look at new customer acquisition data or something else as a secondary data point. Again, don't just look at your numbers in your Google Ads account. That was it for me. I hope you loved it. Remember to subscribe for more tips, and that way you get the new one whenever it comes out.